So when it comes to video games, you do have a number of options when it comes to the difficulty of a game. If you want to play an easy game, you can go out and play an easy game. If you want to play a balls hard game, you can go out and get a balls hard game. If you want to play a game that you're not sure what the difficulty is, a lot of developers realize, well, we're not actually going to give this game an actual proper difficulty. We're going to let the users choose what type of difficulty they want the game to actually have, and that's the case for a lot of video games. A lot of video games don't have one set difficulty. You can choose in the options what type of difficulty to give the game, but for instance, games like the From Software games, you really don't have a choice in what type of difficulty you're going to get. You pretty much have to play it the way the developer intended you to play. So for instance, if you want to play games like the Dark Souls games, if you want to play Bloodborne, or even their new project, Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. Sorry if I'm butchering that name. I keep forgetting the whole title of the name, so I'm just going to call it Shadows Die Twice in this video. But yes, all those games from Software are just super hard, and you don't have a say in the difficulty of the games. That's the way they intended you to play those games. A lot of people out there will just tell you to get good, but there's actually been quite some controversy over their new title from Software called Shadows Die Twice. The reason there's a lot of controversy from fans and from people about Shadows Die Twice is the fact that that game is one of the hardest games out there. It's even harder than their previous works from that studio, so the Dark Souls trilogy and Bloodborne. If you played any of those games, this apparently is supposed to be much more harder than those games. Honestly, even though this game looks like a very good game, it's set in a different universe. It's pretty much not as gritty as what we've seen with games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne. It's more about ninjas, samurai swords, Japan, things like that. And overall, it looks like a good game. It's just not for me because I know this game is going to be way too hard for me, and I don't have the patience, and I really don't have the time to get good at a game like this. I actually remember playing Bloodborne quite recently in the last 2 to 3 years, and that game really did kick my butt really hard, and that game was super hard. I did eventually get to the very ending of the game. I just never went back to finish the game, but from what I played, that game was an amazing game. But I get why a lot of people out there could be complaining about the difficulty of Shadows Die Twice. It's much more harder than the Bloodborne. It's much more harder than the Dark Souls trilogy, so I see where people are coming from. A lot of people out there are saying this game should actually have a difficulty switch on the actual game. You shouldn't play it the way the developers intended you to play. But then on another hand, a lot of people are arguing, yeah, you should play it the way the developers intended the game to play, because you're ruining the experience if you turn down the difficulty of the game and what have you. And in this video, I actually want to chime in and give my thoughts and opinions on super hard games like Shadows Die Twice. Should they put a difficulty switch in the game to make the game much more easier, or should you play the way the developers intended you to play the game? Well, honestly, if you ask me, coming from a gamer that plays a number of different games and a number of games with a number of difficulties attached to these games, honestly, I'm split between having a difficulty switch in some games and having not a difficulty switch in some games. But specifically, we're going to be talking more about Shadows Die Twice specifically. Now, I get where people are coming from who say that they want a difficulty switch in Shadows Die Twice because Shadows Die Twice is an extremely hard game. Yes, it's an amazing game. It plays really well. It's satisfying overall. Overall, it is a very good action RPG, and I get why a lot of people cannot beat the game, because there's people, even if you sit them down in a room with a controller, they can't wrap their minds around certain mechanics, and sometimes people have certain disabilities that literally won't make them or allow them to beat a game. So I get why some people would actually want a difficulty switch in their video game. So that is fair to that. But then on the other hand, of course, you have people that say, no, you just have to get good at the game. By stripping out the difficulty of the game and by having an easier mode, it actually manipulates the way the game's played, and it actually dumbs down the experience. And the whole point of playing these From Software games are supposed to be these hard experiences where you learn from your mistakes. The mechanics are there. They walk you through the process of all these different mechanics you can have in the game, and you're just supposed to learn from your mistakes and learn all the mechanics. That's what's so satisfying about the Dark Souls trilogy, Bloodborne, Shadows Die Twice, it really does feel like a satisfying game when you actually clear that boss after, let's say, the 100th time of you dying. It's meant to be that way, and it's meant to be some kind of accomplishment in a video game. That's why they make these games these way. So what is my take on this whole situation and what people are saying? Should there be a difficulty switch in games like Shadows Die Twice? In my opinion, honestly, it's really hard to say one way or another. Should you put a difficulty switch in Shadows Die Twice, or should you not put a difficulty switch in Shadows Die Twice? I know, coming from the developer, they want you to play the game the way the game was intended to be played, the way they made it, and I get that, and that would be most of the experience. Like I said, by ripping out the difficulty of the game, what do you actually have when it comes to games like Shadows Die Twice or the Dark Souls series? You pretty much have an average action RPG, to be honest, and those games would be quite mediocre without the difficulty. That's why so many people love the Dark Souls series, love Bloodborne, love Shadows Die Twice now, because those games make you feel rewarded and make you have an accomplishment after you actually beaten that boss, like I said, for the 100th time. So I get that. Personally, I do agree with those type of fans as well, because you just have to get good at the game, and it's super satisfying when you actually learn to beat the game the way the game was intended. By having an easy mode, or by having something that'll strip down the difficulty and make it just your average action RPG, what's really the point of playing those games? There's other games on the market that you could play that are much more easier experiences and are tailored towards your type of difficulty in a video game. But then on another hand, if you look at games like Dark Souls, Bloodborne, now Shadows Die Twice, those games are amazing games. The atmosphere is amazing. The actual gameplay is amazing. Just a lot of different core aspects of those games from Software are amazing experiences. And I get why people want a difficulty switch in those games, because those are games maybe you want to personally enjoy. You like the atmosphere, you like the action in it, you like the bosses, you like the world, you like a lot of elements in the game, but you just can't get good at the game for whatever reason it may be. Whether you suck at the game, or whether you just can't wrap your hand around the mechanics, or whether you literally don't have time to get good at the game. Because I will admit, games like all these games that From Software have been developing in their history are games you really have to sit down and really actually learn the mechanics a lot, and some people just don't have the time to do that, so they would like an easy mode in the game. So I get that as well. So overall, it's really hard to choose one side or the other. I get where people are coming from, and I get why people would want an easy mode in the game, since a lot of fans, or a lot of people out there, probably will never be able to beat this game. Let's be honest. It's kind of unfortunate that the game is an amazing game, Shadows Die Twice. Just a lot of people probably will never be able to beat the game. But like I said, personally for me, if I really did have to pick one side or another, it's hard to say, do I want a difficulty switch in the game, or do I not want a difficulty switch in the game? Honestly, I think for me personally, a difficulty switch in games like Shadows Die Twice or the Dark Souls series would actually end up hurting the game overall, because like I said before, if you strip out the difficulty of games like Shadows Die Twice or the Dark Souls games, what do you have? You pretty much have a mediocre action RPG like any other action RPG. That's the main reason people love these games. They actually love the difficulty of these games. They love learning from their mistakes. They love learning the mechanics of the games, and that's why people love these games so freaking much. Like I said 100 times in this video, without the difficulty, it's like, what's the point of playing these games? Sure, you got a good world, you got a good character, you got good mechanics, yada yada yada, but it's really nothing without the difficulty of these games. So I definitely agree with those people as well. So overall, what would I choose? I would probably lean more towards leaving the difficulty the way it is. I know a lot of people complain about it, but you're just going to have to get over the difficulty, and like a lot of people say, get good at the game. And by adding a difficulty switch also would hurt the game, even for people who are actually trying to play it the way the game's intended, because it's kind of like human nature at this point. When you actually put a difficulty switch in the games, a lot of times what will end up happening to people who play video games as a whole is. Even if they're a person who wants to learn the mechanics, get good at the difficulty, they'll end up eventually hitting the difficulty switch on the game and turning down the difficulty, and that's pretty much ripping out most of the experience when it comes to games like Dark Souls or the new Shadows Die Twice game. So I get why they wouldn't want to do that, because people who are learning it just would be too lazy and they would want to skip it. Honestly, for me as well, I do remember a time where there was this one game, can't remember the name of the game, but the game was just too freaking hard, and I definitely hit the difficulty switch. It's just human nature to hit it after a while, because let's say you've been on a boss for like 4, 5, 6 hours and you just can't beat that super hard boss or that super hard part in the game, and there's a difficulty switch that turns down the difficulty. Of course you're going to be tempted to use it, and most likely you're going to use it because maybe it's been frustrating to you, maybe you're running out of time, whatever the case may be. So I get why humans would just want to turn down the difficulty, but that's most of the experience with most of the From Software games, and I personally think they should not put a difficulty switch in these games. Just play it the way the game is intended. Too bad. I guess people are either going to have to get good or go play another video game that's much more easier, because let's face it, not every game is tailored to every type of gamer. There's gamers that just aren't good at video games, there's gamers that are good at video games, and there's just different types of people. So each type of video game is good for different people. I can see why people want to play a game that looks very good, that's very hard, and they want a difficulty switch because they want to play a game that's very appealing to them. It's just too hard. But I guess you're just going to have to look somewhere else. Putting a difficulty switch in these games, personally, in my opinion, definitely ruins the experience, and most likely you're going to use this difficulty switch, and most of these games from Software would be pretty mediocre games, if you ask me personally, without the difficulty involved in these games. That's the whole point of playing these games. They're not like other games on the market. Most games don't really rely too heavily on the actual difficulty of the games, but From Software really knows how to make games that are actually made towards the difficulty. The mechanics work around the difficulty. Overall, it's meant to be played that hard, and too bad for all those people who just can't beat the game. Anyway, guys, this is Wayne from My Tech News, signing out.